I love going out filming, and even more when I can travel with Jonas. On my own, I'm limited in what I can film, but with Jonas it opens up a whole new adventure, as shown on my recent video Trentham Gardens, where I interviewed a keen viewer. I also get to go to motorway services I've never been to before. See those right on my doorstep. If I'm going on a trip, I've got no need of them. Coming home, if I can get this far, generally I can make it home. Well, Dave takes it on, looks at motorway services and discovers a rose among the thorns. Well, for so long now, we've always seen just one or two 50 kilowatt chargers, courtesy of Ecotricity or GridServe. On a busy motorway, these are of no practical use whatsoever. So it's really pleasing to see these are being rapidly replaced by installations consisting of 6, 12 or even more high-powered chargers, each up to 350 kilowatts. Well, most cars cannot accept anything like this rate. Most are limited to between 150 and 250 kilowatts. Those that can charge at this rate get the added bonus. By the way, kilowatts is the power, kilowatt hours is capacity, generally storage or consumption. For example, if you have a 3 kilowatt fan heater, that's the power it will use, it will draw off the grid. If you switch it on and run it for an hour, it will have used or consumed 3 kilowatt hours. Well, multiple chargers mean there is far more chance of finding at least one vacant, and high power means that the speed of charging, i.e. the turnover or throughput, is maximised. A GridServe 50 kilowatt dual bay charger shares that 50 kilowatt between two cars, so if both bays are being used, it means that each one's only getting 25 kilowatts. Well, that's down in the fast charger territory. Anyway, while filming, we now visit the facilities and film what we can. We generally don't film inside for reasons of privacy. And these services generally fall into one of two initial categories: well managed and neglected. There are far too many with just 2 to 50 kilowatt chargers that are often out of order, and the facilities are sadly lacking. They just feel run down. Now others feel bright and vibrant, well tended, and are much more pleasant to use while you charge. A full station by station guide per motorway is being prepared, which will identify which are which. Subscribe please to be notified when we launch that one. Well, service stations then fall into one of two subcategories, determined by their fast food or their coffee chain. Either McDonald's or Burger King, never the both, never two of them. Either Starbucks or Costa, never both. And so on with other facilities. Often the same applies to charger networks. If GridServe has chargers there are unlikely to be any Instavolt or Osprey chargers present. It's either or. Well, almost 10 years ago, way back before I got my EV, I regularly travelled back and forth between the north and Cornwall, and on the M5 I noticed something different. The Gloucester services was totally different. First, the main building was half buried, blending into the surroundings, and it had a grass roof. Yeah, grass, not glass, grass. Well, second, it had none of the mainstream services, like no McDonald's, no Burger King, no Starbucks, no Costa. It had a totally different feel, an atmosphere that was immediately friendly and relaxing. Even like the view out the window, it was out onto a lake and countryside rather than looking at lorries lined up in a lorry park. I've said many times that my favourite services is Tbay on the M6 in the Lake District. It's very much like Gloucester, an absolute pleasure to go there, and the views are certainly dramatic. Plus, you get the added bonus or shock when an RAF fighter jet roars past just feet above you, as this is situated in a valley that the RAF use for low-flying training. I know it well. Before I converted to flying helicopters for the Fleet Air Arm, I was trained to fly fixed wing by the RAF. I was trained in similar valleys in similar ways way back in my junior officer days. But at Tbay is no McDonald's here, no Costa, no chains at all, no pre-prepared food. If you order a bacon bap, they take a fresh bap, cut it, butter it, and take freshly grilled bacon from the food counter. What a change! On one of my many filming trips there over the Maybank holiday weekend, I was pleased to meet up with Nabil, who turns out to be the CEO of Westmorland Limited. That's the company that runs Tbay services. I had a long chat with him and learned an awful lot about getting power to motorway services when the next nearest substation is over 20 miles away, and the restrictions and workarounds they've had to come up with. Well, a recent article in the press announced that a new motorway services had just been approved on the M56 near to Lymm in Cheshire. And I was surprised to find that Westmorland Limited was going to build and run the site. While doing a bit more research, I discovered that first the Gloucester services is also owned by Westmorland Limited, as were Kern Lodge services on the junction of the M74 and the A70 in Scotland. Along the way, I encountered a fascinating story, which I pass on to you here, about the original owners of Tbay, the Dunning family, and how they coped with farming when the first motorway appeared all those decades ago on the M6, and their thoughts and hopes for the future. The Dunning family were farmers long before the M6 was built, and it came as a shock to them to have a massive motorway cut through their farming land. But they treated that as an opportunity, the same way they treated their land and animals, and saw this as an opportunity to offer many more visitors what they really long for. That's natural food products, natural food grown or reared locally, prepared by hand, in an age of fast food prepared on a production line. Well, this extends to the shop, which sells homemade food and products in an age of mass-produced, cheap and nasty Chinese-made tat. Well, no prepared food here. If you order a pie and chips, the chips will have come from potatoes grown locally and been fried there and then, and the pie would have been handmade in the kitchens from with the beef from locally reared cattle. Well, you can probably still find bottles or cans of Coca-Cola. They are dwarfed by the locally grown and made drinks on display. Well, now I'm beginning to understand why the Gloucester services were so similar, and it makes me wonder what they will be doing at Lymm on the M56 when they build that one. Well, my conversation with Nabil revealed that they believe in generating their own power, working with nature, from wind and solar farms adjacent to the services. This power would not only run the services, but also the EV chargers here at Tbay. Well, Tbay was one of the very early sites for a Tesla superchargers, and those original V2s were only recently replaced by the newer V3s, just missing out on the rollout nowadays of the V4s. But at Tbay, they have a real problem with power. Way back in 1972, when the services were opened, they were in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest power was down at Tbay village. And the designers had not imagined that 50 years later, they would need enough power for more than 24 chargers, each at least 250 kilowatts. Well, GridServe are installing here also, but they're not yet open and switched on. While in a major town or city, you just tap into the nearest substation, probably less than a mile away. Here, though, it was tens of miles away and would entail massive cost and disruption. Well, Tbay chargers are already at about the limit of the total power available at that site from that substation. They have talked to Tesla about charging and megapacks, and they're in the process of applying for planning permission for a huge solar PV farm just yards away. But they keep coming back to the same problem, lack of capacity. And in an ironic twist, if they built a solar PV farm linked to batteries, they could not then connect it to the grid because there's no capacity left. What a dilemma. If you built the PV farm and installed megapacks to store it, you could probably run the entire services, chargers and all, for much of the time throughout the summer, the busy time, totally off-grid, relieving the grid. But because the capacity of the power is already at max, the grid refused them a connection, because charging the batteries could add an additional load to an already overloaded substation overnight or in the winter. Well, that problem is ongoing. I will keep you informed. Well, no such problem is likely to occur at Lymm. I suspect there's massive power available really close by. The land is designated as Green Belt, but if anyone is welcome to develop it, it must be the Dunning family, and they have the track record to prove it. Well, new services are only about 40 miles from me, so I intend to get back in touch with Nabil and see if he's willing, well, first to talk to me again, but also to see if I can track and film a new motorway services being built from grass to completion. Well, I'd love these services to be a trend in motorway services for the future. For too long, we've gone down the road of speed and convenience and conformity, which suits the suppliers of those products and services. I think it's time we headed down a new road where nature and the environment took prime place, followed very closely by what is best for us, the customers and users of those services. I wish Westmorland all the success and no problems. Well, thanks for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and leave your comments. They really matter to me. Still a new, small channel, so all of this helps. I'm Dave.